My name's Alina Arzadeh, and I'm writer-in-residence at Seven Sisters Country Park and across the Sussex Heritage Coast for the South Downs National Park Authority. Back in 2019, before COVID, I was out walking around the Seven Sisters near Berlin Gap, and I wrote the beginnings of a story, an imagined encounter between a girl who's migrated to this coast as a child and the chalk cliff, and it's set in 2053. My appreciation of the life journey that my own mother, an Iranian, had made to settle here in the UK, initially in Eastbourne, her love of the Downs and the coastal landscape, and the impact on me that day of seeing the dramatic erosion of the chalk coast, inspired me to want to creatively explore belonging, land, history, climate and future. That story found its way to the ears of the South Downs National Park Authority, and it was their keen interest and deepening partnership and support which was crucial in turning my vision for this project, expressed in the story I'd written, into a writing residency and into We See You Now, a 2-year programme of research, walking and writing retreats, workshops and commissions with and for Black and global majority creatives. For some, this landscape is a familiar and loved place. For others, it's uneasy, like crossing a border from urban or suburban to the unknown rural. Even for myself as a woman, I never used to wander alone, for example, here. My vision was to amplify the idea of a landscape for all, a place of welcome and inclusion, no matter your race, class, sexuality or gender, your disability, socioeconomic or migration status, and to walk with consciousness that we're all part of a global community, to walk and write the global imaginary. As writers, we've all drawn on a spectrum of cultural heritage which links this island to so many other countries through our experience as first or second generation people of migrant or refugee background. This also informed the way I curated the We Hear You Now series, a legacy project in audio of new stories, poetry and myth by 9 of us, which is now installed across the Sussex coastal landscape. Reclamation, being able to say and know I belong here too, takes many forms, of which I believe creativity and storytelling are among the most powerful.
The question with this project was always, how can we help you to do what you would like to do in Countryside? It's meant that the partnership has felt equal, but it's also meant that we've not placed constraints on people's voices. So people can bring their whole selves into the space. They can think about what it means to them in the round. The more that we enrich our stories of Countryside with broader perspectives and experiences, the more of us can feel seen. And once you feel seen, you feel that you belong. And once you belong, you feel you have a stake. And once you have a stake, you have agency. And once you have agency, you'll fight for something. And I think Countryside is facing such huge challenges ahead. Global challenges, national challenges, and we need more people to care for it. We need more people who want to write a letter to their MP or volunteer on a community conservation project or take action for climate change.
My name's Georgina Aboud and my piece is called Precipice. It's a speculative fiction piece, so it's set at a time when climate change and global warming are more fully felt in the south of England. I think the project's been a really fantastic opportunity to interact with the countryside on a much deeper level. I've always been really curious about the area, but this project has allowed interaction in a bit of a different way, I guess. And I think the 2 workshops, Leonie Ross's workshop and Alina's workshop, really awakened my senses to the area. So rather than just looking, I really watch and listen and smell, and it's made them more 3D. And I'm experiencing it rather than just passing through. I now think of Cookmere Haven particularly because that's where my piece is based, as a kind of extension of my own home. I feel like I know it really well now because of my research for the piece of writing. I've got a little bit more of an understanding of this immense history of the area, and I can imagine it when I return there, and it's a really alive place. It brings me enormous joy to walk there and think about what went before and have hopes for the future. I guess in terms of my hopes for the piece, I think there's a lot of fatigue around climate change, and I guess in some way this piece adds to the melee, but I also would hope that the science is really, really clear. We need to take really dramatic action, and we need to take it now. And hopefully the piece gives some sort of visual that might encourage people to do maybe one thing differently in their lives to create a more sustainable way of living.
Hi, my name is Akila Richards, and my short story is called The Twilight Portal, and it deals with a grandmother walking with her granddaughter in Cookmere towards Haven Brow and being changed unrecognizably. And it is about the past colliding with the future and a memory being laid bare. The project really impacted on me enormously, simply because I had an experience of being in the countryside that was associated with fear, not feeling comfortable, not really quite belonging there. And so actually, We See You Now has really given me a confidence of walking in the countryside, particularly with other people, exploring and growing a sense of belonging. And also it has really creatively inspired me to write and given me a different lens and a perspective. So what the space means for me now is about opening internal space. When I walk in Cookmere and I look at the sea, I'm very much aware of the wind traveling towards me and hearing the voices of my ancestors. And so when I then come away, having walked that space, I come away differently and with new information. That is what it means for me now.
My name is Julani Kulasinghe. I'd say that before I started walking with other women of color, I didn't really acknowledge I felt a bit unsafe on my own. And I think that's partly down to a fear of getting lost. But also, I think that I felt hyper-visible, very much a kind of a brown woman in a white space. But walking in the company of these women, amazing creative women, has really given me a greater sense of confidence as a person and as a writer. Even just making the choice to carve out time for myself to write has been a really profound act. When I first went out to the Seven Sisters, I had that real sense of relief and release, that here was a place on the edge of the country. It felt like the edge of the world. And you could see all the way out to where the sky and the sea meets. And it's a place I have always loved. I loved that sense of being on the edge, sort of an end and a beginning at the same time. So my piece, Letters Home, grew out of a sense of disbelief, really. I heard one day that Caribbean soldiers had been stationed at Seaford, and I was astounded that people didn't know, and even more that there was nothing to mark their presence that I was aware of. I hope that when people hear this piece, that it piques their curiosity, inspires them to dig deeper for themselves. I hope that it widens people's notion of who has contributed to the national story. There's a real interest with the wars that Britain has fought over the 20th century, and the absence of the colonial presence is huge, and it really feeds into narratives of not belonging now. And I really hope that my piece is a reminder that we have all been here. We all have a part in the British story, and that the story of these men is not a Black British story. but a story from British history.
My name is Jenny Arach. My poem, The Dubious Tour, speaks about travelling through this landscape of Beachy Head, Cuckmere Haven and Seaford by bus. My poem talks about the everyday lives of working class people, people of black or minority ethnic heritage and experience. And really, it's how this landscape is relevant to people like us, as well. And it also is a way for us to explore our own journeys and our own heritage, and to bring those stories out, not to feel that they somehow are separate and haven't got a place, because they do have a place, a really strong place in this coastal landscape. This coastal landscape wasn't an edge in the distant past. It was actually part of a very long and expansive landscape across to what we now know as France. But even before that, it's part of huge continental land masses. And people walked from East Africa, which is the cradle of mankind, and they walked all the way around the world, and they ended up walking onto this landscape. So for me, that's why I don't feel that there is any borders or barriers. We're all essentially from that same original human kind, really. So that's how I see this poem. It's about all sorts of journeys.
There's an existing relationship for me with the landscape, and a sense of belonging to the larger cathedral, if you like, or the larger space of nature. And so the project, I feel, has deepened that relationship by encouraging me to relate through writing, singing and sounding and walking my histories, our stories and our imaginings into the land itself. That's not the land as a passive thing, that the land has actually invited that. So there's an active relationship, and that sense of belonging is not to something static, but to something that's living and breathing. Doing it collectively as a group of Black and writers of colour and writers of diverse cultural, linguistic, class and religious and different kinds of heritage has been extremely important. A sense of not being isolated, a sense of doing something alongside fellow travellers who are also imagining and writing and moving new stories into the landscape in response to what I feel is a bigger call, the call of nature and the call of human societies to heal that which has been broken, but also imagine different futures.
Why do new stories need to be told? Because everything is changing. The landscape, our society, and so our stories for the South Downs need to reflect those changes too, and they can help us also to navigate them. It's been incredible for me personally to have had the time and support to walk, meet and learn from all kinds of people, research and mine memories, associations and histories connected to this landscape, including the overlooked stories of the slave wealth and working class labour that this region is built on and its links to climate justice. To learn about biodiversity loss and renewal through the Renature and other programmes, and to be able to write and invite others to write from an embodied experience of the landscape as part of us all. There's been a lot of support across the South Downs National Park in the midwifing of this often complex project to become reality. And I'm excited to see what the public makes of the walking and listening experience of We Hear You Now that we're now offering, which has been one of the major fruits of such an extraordinary 3-year creative process through my residency, which I'm really honoured to have been part of making happen. The full collection of this 3-hour series is also online at sevensisters.org.uk/we here-you-now, together with captioned versions and a guide for walkers to explore the landscape for themselves.